Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Perspective. As far as the mini budget is concerned, we've seen yesterday the government managed to have it approved. It managed to sail through with whatever numbers. Certainly, the government, the opposition, with its token of protest, there's a lot of criticism on whether there really was just a show of protest or was there a real protest as far as the mini budget was concerned. We'll be talking about that. We'll also be talking about a lot of rumors that at this time are fueling the capital, which is certainly not new, which happens now and again, regarding the government, regarding different kind of deals. How much of that is true? How much of what is going to be the impact of this mini budget on the people actually? We'll be talking about that. How much of a price increase are we looking at? All of those things today on Perspective. I have with me Hameed, who is President Re-Energia and also has a long history of expertise as far as economy is concerned. We also have with us Miftah Ismail, who's a former finance minister. Thank you so much for joining us today. Amir Saab, like I said, as far as the politics of it is concerned, I will go to Miftah Saab on it. But overall, as far as the mini budget is concerned, we've had a discussion on this generally. How do you see it today, now that the government has managed to get it approved? Because we're also talking about increase in fuel prices. We're also looking at substantial increases in other commodities. There was that whole debate about how it's going to be luxury items, but now it seems to be essentials also. How do you see that?
Well, thank you very much, Marukh. I think we talked about this last week as well when the budget was initially tabled.
Yeah.
I think that first and foremost, the narrow majority through which the government won today, and especially even the opposition's amendments that were shot down, I think are again very, very narrow and slim margins. I think these slim margins don't, on one hand, talk a little bit about the politicization of the cabinet itself, but I think more so it, to me, talked about that not many people have actually thought about the implications of this. To be very, very honest, I think the total burden of this is about 350 billion rupees.
Okay.
And I think if we again recall the time of when we discussed about, tabling the mini budget, out of a total size of the economy, this is not a very large impact.
Okay.
I think there's a lot of hearsay about how consumer prices will be impacted. The consumer price impact is actually not directly related. I mean, as we discussed last time, again, it's kind of repetitive. But as I mentioned, consumer prices, rural versus urban, the price rise you will see is an excuse that we see every time the government takes a tax measure.
Okay.
Does it really impact the shopkeeper wholesaler? For example,
okay,
one of the things you saw today is that they have actually said that tier 1 retailers is where the taxation will start, right? So anything below that, the rediwala, the chabriwala, the small sellers are not going to be impacted by this.
Okay.
Part of this is also a question of how is the government going to implement that, but we'll keep that aside for a second.
Okay.
The second part on fuel price rise and everything, right? So the government has to come up with some money somewhere,
okay,
right? So this is an inevitability, and I challenge. In fact, if you looked at the speech by, I think it was one of the responses made by Tareen Saab, that exactly what they're doing today is what was demanded during the times when he was previously the finance minister, right?
okay,
And that was during the PPP government. So to me, the way I look at it, I mean, the mini budget, its impact overall is not going to be a significant lot, right?
okay,
What else has changed? If you look at going back, I mean, they're putting, taxes on cars. I mean, there's going to be, and this is not something that PMLN has never done.
okay,
If we go back to 1997, if I'm exactly correct, the
okay,
PMLN bought about a CVT tax of outright on 1200 cc cars and above of
okay,
77,000 rupees, which in those days, if you really want to talk about automotive industry and sales, this was when credit was just being opened up and suddenly this was slashed on.
okay.
So I think this is a budget of necessity. Why this was not done earlier, that is the one part that baffles me a little bit, because the discussions with the fund, if those are really what's behind this, and that also is a point to discuss, well, let's wait and see.
Okay, let me come back to you. We have with us the Minister of Information, Fawad Chaudhry Sabji. Fawad Sab, overall, there's a lot being said at this time. There are a lot of conspiracy theories that are, again, being talked about. There are talks of deals. There are talks of rifts within the party. How do you answer that? What's the situation following the parliamentary meeting that happened yesterday?
Well, this is, as you said yourself, is a conspiracy theory. When the vote in the parliament itself is sufficient to prove that everything that came out from the parliamentary theory as a conspiracy theory was actually nothing but false. It was just a pack of lies. In the parliament, all PTI parliamentarians are united under the leadership of Prime Minister Imran Khan, and this is PTI is the single largest party in the parliament. We prove almost every day. Yesterday's legislation just proved this very fact again. There's no problem at all as far as the number game is concerned.
As far as the protest by the opposition is concerned, because a lot is being said that it was just a token protest, they didn't really, they knew that there's no other way. I mean, this mini budget has to go forward, it has to sail through regardless of whichever government it is, and the protest was symbolic rather than there being any real meaning to it.
Well, absolutely, because the problem is that in Pakistan, most of the opposition is just criticism for criticism. They really have no plan. I mean, for example, just look at this amendment in the Finance Act. Had it been, any other country, any other democratic country, opposition would have come with alternative proposals. But in Pakistan, opposition has nothing to say but all criticism. So that's one reason their currency is not really selling, and they are going down and down every day. They have no plan. They have no strategy. Their only, wish list is that there will be weakness of the PTI that will serve them right. But this is not going to happen, and obviously, in the absence of any policy,
as far as Bilawal Bhutto is concerned, he discussed the provisions that the amendments, he spoke about them. Do you think that there's a chance that there is now, that the limited time that is left, there will be some kind of credible alternatives coming from the opposition? Do you think you can have some kind of a relationship with the opposition on core issues like economy, for example, whichever government now comes in after this? Of course, it's in the interest of the country. Do you think it's possible to have that? Will you extend, will the PTI or the government at this time extend itself to the opposition?
No, actually, we offer dialogue on these core issues every day. We ask opposition to come forward, sit with us on electoral reforms, on economy, on judicial reforms. We say it every day, but unfortunately, the pattern is that the opposition really don't want to discuss anything but their cases. As far as their cases are concerned, we cannot negotiate criminal cases. I mean, then what's the difference between Imran Khan and the past governments? Imran Khan is very clear on it that we will not discuss cases. We're not ready to give any kind of special favors or NRO to opposition. They have to contest their cases in the courts, which are independent, which obviously no one in the world can say that the courts in Pakistan serve government. They don't, and the cases they must contest in the courts. And we are ready to talk about big reforms like election commission reforms, as I said, judicial reforms and economic reforms. There is no two opinions about that.
Okay, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for joining us. We have with us Miftah Ismail, the former finance minister. Miftah Sahab, I hope you've been following the conversation overall. As far as let's talk about the amendment in the Finance Act, which Fawad Sahab mentioned. He said that there are no alternatives that come from the opposition. There is criticism for the sake of criticism, and we don't get alternatives. We don't get other measures that then the government can adopt. How would you answer that?
Thank you. But what Fawad is saying is actually not true. The opposition offered many amendments. The government actually suspended rules. Yesterday was actually a really a sad day for democracy in Pakistan, where and parliamentary traditions, where the speaker once again was very partisan. Uh, he was not mindful of the traditions of the parliamentary debate. He was not even letting people vote, or letting opposition members ask for counting of votes. And this uh, 350 billion rupee 6 month tax, which means for a year a 700 billion rupee tax was raised, was done so without giving opposition the time for debate, and all rules were suspended. So I mean, I think that really is sad a state of affairs for PTI minister to come here and say, if the opposition did not offer alternative. You didn't even let opposition talk to you. I mean, you didn't even let opposition talk and have debate. You ramrolled this thing. And the worst person, the one person who's actually commented on this, I think, extensively, is the finance minister himself, who has said in the past, not very, while he was a minister, not more than a few weeks back, that this bill was detrimental to our interest. And he said he would go to the fund and get it changed. He failed clearly, and now this tax has now been imposed on the people of Pakistan, supposedly luxury tax, which I did not know that bread was a luxury item in Pakistan. I did not know that chicken was a luxury item in Pakistan, or flavored milk was a luxury item, or yogurt was a luxury item. I did not even know bicycles were luxury. I did not know that cotton seeds and canola seeds and sunflower seeds that our farmers buy, so that we can grow these crops in Pakistan and not have to import edible oil of $3.5 billion from Malaysia every year. I did not know that this was a luxury item. I did not know that the drip feed for small farmers was a luxury item. This is a colossal mistake that this government has made, and had absolutely no justification for putting in taxes when they had said at the beginning of the year that there would be no mini budget in the middle of the year. And this is the biggest mini budget in Pakistan.
Were you in their place at this time? You've been a finance minister before, of course, you're a former finance minister. Do you think that any government at this time, considering the global trend, which is what the government keeps talking about as far as inflation and price hike is concerned, would have had other alternatives but to go down this route?
Well, of course. I mean, first of all, if you start with the price hike, the government talks about there being an international increase in prices, and that's absolutely true. But the fact of the matter is that we are the most expensive country in all of South Asia. We have an inflation rate which is twice that of India. We have an inflation rate which is about twice that of Bangladesh and Sri Lanka. We have an inflation rate which is also about twice that of Nepal. So obviously something is being done badly in Pakistan compared to our peer countries. I mean, I think we used to be the fourth highest inflation country in the world. Now I think we become the third highest inflation country after Turkey and Argentina. So obviously things are not that good in terms of the management of this economy. This government can't remove snow from the streets, and people die. So I mean, so these guys, I mean,
whatever government would be in place at this time would be going to IMF and would be trying to get whatever best deal they could at this time. To that extent, you agree, right?
No. I think that going to the fund is fine. Going to the IMF is fine. But getting the right deal is important. You know what Yunus Dhaga, former Secretary of Finance, has said, who was in a very distinguished career as a finance secretary and as a bureaucrat, that he was asked to leave the room by Hafiz Sheikh when they were negotiating with the IMF, and that they had, Asad Umar and Yunus Dhaga had negotiated a better deal 10 days before that. In Washington, and when they came and people were changed, the governor of State Bank was asked to step down, and Raza Bakar came. Finance minister was changed, Hafiz came, and other people came. FBR chairman was changed. Then they wrote this deal. Then Shaukat Tareen said a few days ago that I had to accept this deal only because Hafiz Sheikh had already borrowed $500 million from the IMF. So, and then Shaukat Tareen, when he went to Washington, D.C., he said, I'm going to get a better deal. And he was actually, and if you ask people in the finance ministry, they will tell you that it was the State Bank that was undermining the finance ministry. and they were not on the same page. The State Bank actually was actively trying to sabotage any effort that the Finance Ministry was making.
I want to, Miftah Sahab, I have to go to Amir Sahab, but I want to come back and talk about the fact that, of course, the Finance Minister talked about how the State Bank would be governed by a board of governors and therefore would be controlled by, effectively controlled by them, and not anything to the contrary, which, you know, I'd like you to answer that, but let me go to Amir Sahab first. Amir Sahab, as far as luxury goods are concerned, you've been hearing the conversation. You heard what Miftah Sahab said. How far do you agree with him?
Well, by and large, I mean, you know...
you think it could have been avoided?
Let me go stepwise. The first thing when he said that the opposition, I do have to disagree with Fuad, that, you know, the opposition did table some propositions and they did table amendments. Some of them were thought out, some were simply just opposition for the sake of opposition. But yes, I think the fundamental in that particular realm, the fundamental issue is if you are the Treasury benches, so you should have the faith, if you think your majority is that slim, you should have made, I mean, look, just a few regimes back, Tareen was PPP's finance minister.
Okay.
So just a regime back, Miftah Sahab was PMLN's finance minister. What difference does it make if you put them all on the same table and have a discussion? Okay. This is what committees are for. This is what, you know, it's a relationship call. To be very honest, I can ask Miftah if he's not friends with ShahRukh. Obviously he is. They go to the same, probably, dinners together. So I think the fundamental dialogue is missing. So, you know, so then the second point made by Miftah Sahab is about the bread, and I don't think I will treat that sensationalist observation because that's just, I think, Miftah Sahab's call to say that.
But those essential items will increase.
Well, that's not true. You're putting a GST on it, and it's also being put at a retail tier. Okay. People just don't pay any tax.
So you're saying, so when the government says that it's effectively documenting the economy by bringing this, they're right.
We have this discussion every day on every channel. If you really skim through this and you peel down the wrappers, this is what it is.
But it does mean more for the people, whether, of course, it goes in taxes or not.
Well, let me ask you this question. I mean, the question is, like, if we have 60% rural economy and half of that at least does sustenance agriculture, would it make a difference to them? No. Okay. Where does it make a difference? This makes a difference in the city centers where vote banks are. Obviously, the rural vote banks also matter. But end of the day, I mean, so I think that's where it's going to hurt. Okay. But who are these people who are retailing, right? I mean, these are these are powerful lobbies. I mean, have you ever gone and met one of these retail commissions or unions? I mean, they are very, very powerful. They want to squeeze everything away. I mean, you see, the thing which we are not discussing, the elephant in the room, is that when the basic question with the economy is that every person lives by the mantra that paying taxes on Islamic. I mean, that's really hitting it where it is. Right.
Let me come back to you. We have with us Faisal Kareem Kundi, who's leader PPP. Kundi sir, we've been talking about the mini budget and also the fact that opposition, of course, protested, but how much of it was, you know, met with some alternatives that could have, you know, giving the government something sustainable rather than just, you know, opposing it for the sake of opposition. How far would you agree with that? Of course, you know, as far as Bilawal Bhutto is concerned, he did make some, I mean, he did discuss the provisions, he did discuss some of the measures that the government was taking. But do you think that overall this is something, you know, a lot is being said about the fact that this is something that had to be done and the opposition sees that?
Marukh, we had yesterday a mini budget of this government, and I think it was atomic bomb on the poor people, on the ordinary people of Pakistan. Because if you see, we are having a lot of taxes on citizens of Pakistan. This is the government when they were in opposition. They were when they were on the container, when they were having press conference. What were they saying about the taxes and things? Now, thing is when the unit of electricity was 8 rupees, the Prime Minister was tearing off the bills. Electricity bills. Now it's 28 rupees per unit. For today, they have already increased the electricity also. And in 2-3 days, they are increasing oil prices also. The people of Pakistan, they are barely having their ordinary life passing because if you see, there is a taxes on milk, on all the items, if you say, if there is sugar, if there is flour, whatever the things. And wherever, if you see, there is
talking about the fact that it means, as far as taxes are concerned, of course, our tax to GDP ratio, where we are in the larger scheme of things as an economy, is dismal. It has been for a long time, regardless of which government is in power. Don't you think that, the government is taking the stance that this is essentially documenting the economy? You don't agree with that?
I don't agree with that, because if previous governments, they didn't put that much taxes on the people of Pakistan, which they are doing. They are saying that we are giving back our loan also. But if you see how much loan they have given back and how much loan they have taken from the IMF, they have already surrendered in front of IMF. They have already, and whatever we have seen, the State Bank has gone in the hands of the IMF. All things are you giving away in the hands of it. I'm not saying that. Look at the parliamentary party meeting which was held yesterday, and the news coming from the parliamentary party is in front of you in all media channels, in all newspapers. Today, when there was already some debate, and the member from the trade benches, they were standing up and they were talking against their government. If you go to the markets, if you go to the public, see the reaction.
That's something the government, of course, is denying that they would, but they're also saying that, as far as Parvez Khattak Saab is concerned, he also came out and said, well, disagreements are part of their parliamentary process. It's a democratic party, all of those things. Keeping that aside, my question is, would any other government at this time do things differently? Could, that's my question. In the kind of situation that we are in at this time, leaving the politics of it aside, would they be able to do things differently considering our situation economically, vis-a-vis the IMF, our own internal situation, all of those things?
Surely, if there would have been some political government, they would have dealt properly with that. We as a Pakistan People's Party, we went to IMF also. But we didn't accept it, that type of taxes which they are accepting it right now. They have totally surrendered. Whatever IMF is dictating, they are listening to them. In political government, when we were in the government, we were negotiating with them. And we were trying a lot to put less taxes on people of Pakistan, on the poor people also. But they have given everything to them, and whatever IMF drafted, they have brought it to them. And their own allies, the government allies, they have got reservation on it. Their own parliamentarians are talking. Okay, put Parvez Khattak aside, parliamentary party aside. Today, when there was parliament session, their own parliamentarians got up on their seats. And what were they saying? If you have seen the media, if you have seen in the social media or news on the TV, their own parliamentarians were getting up and they were against the mini budget and whatever they were saying about the government. And they were criticizing that there is no gas in our area, there is no electricity in the area. So they were saying that this is happening. It was not opposition parliament.
By your own argument, you're saying that people within the party are not happy with it. So it certainly seems to be one of those measures that the government seems to have to take rather than they being wanting to impose these taxes. Please stay with us. I will come back to you. Ji, Amir Saab.
Yeah, so thank you. Look, let me just start from where the gentleman said. MQM opposed, right? They're not members of PA, they're part of a coalition. So take that, let's keep that for granted. They're the ones who were the loudest protesting today. Again, if you want to understand from my end, neither party, neither PPP nor PMLN, nor as for that matter JUI, nor for example the ruling party, the Treasury itself, has actually talked numbers. So two things have happened, Marukh. Okay. First is, when you look at it, somebody came out with this arbitrary taxation, which I can tell you who it was, definitely not Q Block, it was definitely FBR, right? Okay, this has to be done, this is done. The finance minister said, okay, let's do it. What is the economics behind this? What is the socio-economic decision-making behind that? One has no clue. If they had done their econometrics right and they had run the numbers, each party would be saying the net result of 350 billion taxes would be X amount of inflation, food inflation, X percent of this, added up to rural and urban X amount, right? Have we heard that even from any one of these party benches? No. So the second part, PPP, if they say this is the highest inflation ever, I'm sorry. I'm not exactly a PDI supporter, but let me give the numbers here. From 2007 to 9 was the highest inflationary period that Pakistan has ever seen till now. So that's a fact. So again, nobody talks numbers.
Do we have Miftah Saab with us? Miftah Saab, can you hear me? I don't think so. I wanted him to answer that. Kundi Saab, he's saying that, Amir Saab, I hope you've been following. He's saying that as far as inflation is concerned, he's talking about your tenure also, the PMLN also, but certainly, in terms of where the numbers are, what the actual situation is, certainly we didn't see any of that kind of homework come from the opposition, whether it's from the PPP or the PMLN. Because actually the politics of it is one-sided, of course, and like you mentioned, it should concern anybody with a constituency who has to go back and answer their voters. So regardless of whether it's the PTI or the BPP or the PMLN, more so the PTI, because they have to go back and not not a year or a year and a half is left for them to go back to their voters. So of course it's a cause of concern, should have been a cause of concern for the PTI itself also. But isn't it about the fact that it has to be done? Again, I want an answer to that.
I don't think so.
Amir Saab, I don't think he can hear me, but
essentially
this is a question I've been trying to get.
Yeah, Marukh, they have a paper. Manviwala Saab has put out a paper. PPP has just put out this white paper, and I think my figure comes from exactly that. While they are right on certain commodity prices, if you look at their own calculation, they show that the period of PPP, first, let's say 2000, was the highest inflation ever.
Okay.
So, end of the day, I think that what we're really lacking here is really a sensible dialogue with some numbers, everything. You see, there is no argument, there can be no discussion with political statements. This is the problem. So if someone wants to make a political statement and say that, the Treasury is right or wrong, or the Treasury wants to say, I think on both sides of the fence, what we have seen is an absolute lack of understanding in numbers.
Overall, I know that this is a political question, but the question overall, as far as if you look at our politics, you look at the economy, there's a lot of discussion on price hike. There's a lot of politics on price hike and inflation, and of course that happens in other parts of the world also. But like you are saying, there's very little research. There are political statements that come from everyone, from all parties, and there are those protests that you, I'm sure, also saw in the National Assembly yesterday, where invariably, they get their women members also to come out and hold those placards and do all of that. Don't you think that our politics, I know this is a political question, but I'm sure that, even somebody it's a political economy, you said yourself, I think last time. Doesn't it concern you also that our politics generally has become all about these statements that are backed by very little authentic facts, and that is what we've become. Even our assembly generally also, we don't see anybody come up with, like you said, an alternative or come up with sound numbers. These people, I'm sure they have their teams, they have huge paraphernalia, they have people who can actually crunch out the numbers and give them,
No, actually, you're absolutely right. I think at the end of the day, when we look at it, there are some numbers floating out there. There are think tanks that generate numbers. All these parties have their think tanks. But the unfortunate reality is that once you come on the floor of the assembly or the legislature, you basically start browbeating. Browbeating is your norm. The form of politics is wrong. Now, what we are missing here, Marukh, is that if you look at what IMF really wanted you to do, which is what everybody has been telling the Pakistani legislature for the last 30 years, is some fundamental structural reform. Cutting down the size of the government. Number two, provinces starting to raise their own taxes. Now, why does this always have to fall onto the Federal Assembly? Do you know that the largest tax effort by any province of what they spend is only by Punjab, and that's only 4%. So Punjab barely collects 4 to 5% of what it actually wants to spend.
Okay.
Now, with all this devolution, my first question is, here is another structural reform gone awry, right? So, number one, the politics of browbeating, no real substance. The research that is there, no thought about fundamental structural reform, how NFC is being treated, how money is being transferred. Now, the government would not be in this debate if the provinces are more accountable to raise their own taxes. Then it would be a real test of, who rules where. The third thing, 300 plus state-owned enterprises still lying there, right? I mean, with nothing to do, billions being lost, in fact, the estimate trillions, right? Last but not least, there are three fundamental things raising their head because we're not solving the first two. The pension bill, whether it is the federal plus provincial, civil plus military. The second thing is that bill is the other thing is coming is the gas debt. So basically, so far we just simply talk about the power sector debt. Well, the power sector debt is very soon going to be the energy debt. So the same kind of so-called circular debt is emerging from it. So, these fundamental questions are not being tackled. Honestly, this 300 billion additional tax, the government has no other recourse at this point in time other than shutting down. Now, what is not being discussed, I think, which if I was in the opposition benches today, I would have actually raised the point as to saying, okay, guys, how much of your expenditure are you really cutting down?
Okay.
Right? Has anyone talked of curtailing expenditure? No, no one really talks of that.
Yes, but I think the opposition talked about it yesterday.
Well, the opposition talked about that yesterday, but the opposition is the one that recruited the most number of people in the government. So when the opposition talked about curtailing expenditure, both the opposition and the treasury agree on just one thing. They will cut the development expenditure. Boom. Nobody wants to cut down the expenditure on these 300 SOEs running around, the huge size of government.
Especially not the government when they're a year and a half away from the elections. They're not
well, I mean, again, if we go back to what the government is doing right now, if you want to be so unpleasant, well, be really unpleasant, right? And even that's not happening.
Okay. So, but overall, as far as the PTI is concerned, certainly as far as structural reform is concerned, it's one of those things that, was attributed or people were hopeful that, there would be those kind of reforms emanating from. Do you think it's because of the numbers? Certainly because, of course, at this time, every time the mini budget has to be passed, we see the government going to its allies. We see there, there's certainly a lot of backdoor diplomacy also going on, which is talked about in trying to bring the allied partners in and, do the voting, all of those things. The pressure is there. Wouldn't you agree?
I think if I can be very, very straightforward about that,
please.
I think that the government, when it came in, is an infant government. It's the first time they are in government. I think the people who are really or were the core of setting the agenda for the Treasury, i.e. the PTI, today, actually had no clue how to implement their righteous plan. So, as they say, the road to good intentions is paved usually with a lot of problems, right? Yeah. So the thing is that the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Yes. So this is exactly what's happening. The part of the team which the government got together, essentially to say, okay, could you teach us how to implement? They don't really want to do this. These were the so-called electables that we have currently in the Treasury benches. So at the end of the day, I think the government's team itself, just the change in the finance minister, just the change, look at how, and again, it's not a question, it's a question of when something really hits home. Were they able to do the pandemic well? The answer is yes. It's been a world-class example. I'm not saying everything is hunky-dory, but timely making sure that NDMA, which is totally become perfunctory, and despite everyone getting fat salaries, look at what they did in Murray. They immediately created the NSUC and
but Amitabh, you're talking about good intentions. You mentioned that, but the point is, if you talk about individuals, you yourself mentioned, these are the same people, whichever political party they are now a part of. Whether you talk about the finance minister, who's currently the finance minister, or different ministers overall, there seems to be a certain rotation of sorts. If you look at the assembly as a whole, I don't know. I mean, I don't have the exact percentage of how many people are new, but most of them would be older, seasoned politicians, maybe from another party at one time, or not, or from the same party. So one would expect them to know those things. One would expect them to have been part of the old setup or to know. So what is it then? Then we would be doing the same thing, but in another party. We would be grappling with the same issues.
Marukh, what's a seasoned politician in your definition? In my definition, what we call a seasoned politician is somebody that is totally now understanding the pulse of their constituency.
Okay.
The problem in our system is it doesn't matter whether you are again treasury or opposition. The moment you get elected, you forget about your constituency, right?
Okay.
You come and the politics is played here in the capital or in the provincial capitals, right?
Okay.
We just saw the result of that in the KP council elections, right? I mean, at the lowest level. Now, if you want to talk about where the disconnect is, I think the disconnect is that the politicians really go and understand the pulse of the people once a year when elections come by. That is not seasoned politics, right? If you look at any other country system, most of the reasonable countries, the politician gets elected, spends time in their constituency. I was just in Balochistan. I went throughout Balochistan, you know, or pretty much going through all districts. And the only common thread I found is that all the politicians elected to the Federal Assembly have never come back to the constituency. And everyone who's elected to the Quetta National Assembly has never been to their constituency. Yes, I mean, maybe Jam Kamal Saab went once to Las Bela and wanted to talk about things. But, you know, so the thing is, that's
So then you attribute the fault to the people who then re-elect them.
Well,
we need to have some sort of, you know.
I think this is really getting, so basically when you say, why does the economic not work? Now remember, economics is a social science, right? So the people who don't understand how society works cannot do good economics, right? So end of the day, this whole economic malfunctioning of the state, you see, one can paint the picture whichever one way you want. Now there is a picture being painted by PTI, which the world is buying. Let me just refer you to what happened. I mean, 2 days ago, the World Bank said, oh, hey, you know, Pakistan's growth is looking pretty okay. So what does that mean? So let's say the World Bank said 3.9%. Remember what the World Bank said last year? It was minus 2%, right? So I made a sly remark on this saying that, you know, given that estimate, we should be at 8 or 9% this year. So, you know, isn't that true? Now the question is that when you really think about it, it's a simple matter calculating, understanding what have you produced this year, what have you manufactured this year, what your crops are going to be like. We have all the wherewithal. Yet our inability to sit in April, and it's going to come around very soon, and start fudging numbers about estimated growth rates and everything.
But isn't it true that the government said it was going to be about 3.9% earlier on?
Okay, the government earlier on was, the government, there are many parts of the government. If you remember April of last year, I think Hafiz Sheikh was still there, and as the finance minister, the government was actually did sort of saying, oh, well, it's not going to be that bad. They didn't give out a number. The government's number finally came out in, I think, post-April, when we had the estimates on the crops, the wheat, the rice, the total manufacturing, the LSM, and we understood that the construction policy had actually done a lot to build that. The fact that we didn't shut down transport had a lot to do with that. But end of the day, the government had no clue, because even the State Bank was saying minus 2%, or I think it was minus 1.4%. So you know, again, coming back, seasoned politicians, I don't think a politician is seasoned until and unless they go back. And each constituency, by the way, is not the same.
Right, of course. We have with us Salman Shah, who is a former finance minister, also advisor to CM Punjab. Ji, Salman Sir, we have been talking about, we have very limited time left, but overall we've been talking about the mini budget. I think we had a discussion with you earlier on this also. Now that it's passed, there is generally a question that I've been trying to ask, you know, we've had former finance minister Miftah Saab also, we've had Faisal Kareem Kundi also. I've been trying to get them to answer this question, that would any other government at this time be able to do things differently? Do you think that there is a chance? We've been talking about structural reform, which is one of those things that, of course, you know, when the PTI came in, a lot of reform was on the agenda. They spoke about it. Do you think that we will, leaving the point about whether the other governments could do differently, do you think that we will get to that kind of structural reform? Of course, we're also now a year and a half from the elections.
I think this is very important that this bill be passed, and it has passed, and I think it is good for the economy of Pakistan, because it gives us the opportunity to refinance all our debt. We have a huge amount of debt repayments, particularly the foreign debt, and without the IMF we wouldn't have been able to do it. Now we have that kind of option. We can access the capital markets. We can issue bonds. We can do other things, and we can extend the maturity of our loans. And at the same time, we can put competitiveness and productivity related reforms into place. And that means that we can gradually grow out of this problem. We are already growing at around 4%. Our banks are in a very healthy position. Our corporates have made good profits, and they have paid out good dividends, and they have the ability to finance and to invest in the growth of the economy. And therefore, I think the deregulation of the economy, which is needed so that investment can be put forward, the tax reforms, we are already, this is, in fact, this mini budget has the general sales tax, in a way, a reform of the sales tax to make it into a value-added tax, and that has passed through Parliament. So I think we have now a window of opportunity in which we can push through very deep reforms. And by 2023, where by the time the elections come, then I think if we have the recovery which we are hoping for, it will be a tough contest then, because then PTI will be able to go to the elections with performance of reforms, which no other government has been able to do for at least the last 40 years. So I think in that sense, the voices you heard in the PTI's meeting, the Prime Minister very clearly stated that his mission is reform of Pakistan. He is not looking at constituency politics. He's looking at how do you get the country out of the debt trap, how do you put the economy on a growth path, how do you make it competitive, productivity-wise as well, and how do you protect the people? I mean, this is in this government we have the maximum allocations for the social sector, and for the first time.
You know, yes, when we talk about reform, we talk about all of those things. The Prime Minister is not looking at them, but the people, you know, the members themselves of PTI, certainly they have to go back to their constituencies, at least for the votes. So do you think that there will be some cause for concern there when these kind of reforms, you know, actually bear, you know, before they bear fruit? And we saw some of that, you know, there is a lot being said about the Pervez Khattak incident that happened in the parliamentary meeting. However, you know, how much of that is true, whether or not, you know, it's been added on or not. But the issue is that to a politician who's going to go back for votes, it should concern him, right?
I think it stemmed from his constituency politics of gas connections, and that was something on which all the heat was generated. It had nothing to do with the overall reforms needed in the country. And I think in this particular case, the government is focusing on the have-nots as well, because it is for the first time that you have programs for the marginalized sections of society, the Kamyab Pakistan program, the Insaf, the health card, all these programs.
Say that Benazir income support was also one such program, right?
Well, that has been now the Asas program. It has been expanded considerably. But the health insurance, I think that is a real game changer. Don't forget that in the UK, health insurance was introduced after the Second World War, and ever since the Labour Party is fighting elections on the basis of health insurance. So this is a very big game changer, and I think that it's good that there is debate in the political party and people can speak their minds. But at the end of the day, you stand together in Parliament. So I think to answer your question, yes, times are very tough, and yes, the party has paid a political price for these reforms so far, and even for the IMF program, which is essential. And hopefully by 2023, the results will be there and we'll be in a much more comfortable position.
Right. Thank you so much for being with us. Unfortunately, that's all the time that we have. Thank you for joining us. Amir Durrani Saab, thank you for making the time. Miftah Ismail Saab, thank you for joining us. Salman Shah Saab, thank you for being with us. Faisal Kareem Kundi Saab, thank you for joining us. Fawad Chaudhry Saab, thank you for your time. Overall, as far as structural reform is concerned, certainly that is something that remains on the agenda, and the government says that the mini budget is their way of course, this one step in that direction of also documenting the economy. What are the effects? Of course, we will know in the next couple of months. And how the government overall tackles this, also constituency politics, and how much of concern it can prove for the average member who has to go back for votes in the constituency. All of that, of course, we will know in the next couple of weeks. Thank you so much for being with us today. Thank you for joining us.